What's your first general order?
First general order?
Yeah.
Sir, may I see your authority to enter? And then you hear, 1, white middle finger. Come on.
You passed it. Wave goodbye.
The Brig boys are here now. We gotta say a little something.
Boys are here. And we're invading tomorrow.
You know, the Brig Tattoo Parlor has only been around for about 15 months. And now, I know that isn't a very long time, but a lot has happened. When I first opened up the Brig, it was just me in a little brick building, about 300 square feet, 6 streets away from here. And depending on the day you'd ask me, I'd have told you that I was probably gonna tattoo there till I couldn't anymore. But little did I know that I was gonna receive a DM on Instagram that would pretty much change my life forever. So yeah, in the last 15 months, the Brig Tattoo Parlor has not only grown in clientele and square footage, but it's also matured. It isn't a one-man band anymore, it's a team. So I'd like to introduce you to the guy who slid in my DMs and has been a big part in making the Brig Tattoo Parlor what it is today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Brandon Adams.
Hey guys, I'm Brandon. I've been tattooing for 15 years now. I'm originally from down south in Florida. I relocated here to Omaha 8 years ago, and I've been tattooing at the Brig since opening day, February 27th of this year. Somebody said, oh shit, the big...
I mean, the big boys too.
Big Brandon coming!
Now, I wasn't always a tattooer. Like Geoff, I have a military background. I'm 42, and I told you guys I've been tattooing for 15 years, so what were you doing before that, Brandon? I used to be in the Air Force. Long time ago. seems like a real long time ago now. I joined the Air Force in 2003, and to be honest with you guys, the Air Force wasn't always the plan. You know, a lot of people join right out of high school, and you know, that's something they always aspire to. To be quite honest with you guys, the Air Force was kind of almost a desperation move. When I joined the Air Force, I didn't know if I was gonna like it or not. You know, when I got out of high school, I didn't go straight into the military, I didn't go to college. You know, a lot of kids say they don't like school. I really didn't like school. So, you know, from 18 until 20, I pretty much learned every lesson the hard way, you know, and you know, I chose to take the hard road, and I'm certainly not ashamed of it, but I did learn a lot of lessons the hard way. So at 20, you know, I kind of had the realization of, okay, I still don't really know who or what I am or what I'm gonna be in this life, but it's gotta be better than what I'm doing, you know. And at the time, the Air Force offered security. It offered a steady paycheck. It offered, you know, medical benefits. A roof over my head. You know, one day I found myself at a recruiter's office, and I joined up. You know, my thoughts were, I don't know if I'm gonna like this Air Force thing, but they'll teach me a trade. They'll teach me a skill set that if I don't like being in the Air Force, you know, I can use that in civilian life and have a pretty good life. You know, I chose the Air Force for a lot of reasons, but I'm not really like a 9-to-5 guy. I'm not really like a desk job kind of guy. You know, I love to travel. I love to explore. You know, I thought if I can get the Air Force to teach me how to work on planes, if the Air Force thing doesn't work out, you know, maybe I can get out and get a job, you know, working for Delta or something like that. And then I can still have a good job, and you know, maybe get a little bit of free travel. So I joined up and I fell in love with it. I really did. I had no idea. I mean, I had some family in the military, you know, different branches that, you know, I had heard this story or that story, but you don't really know until you join yourself. And very quickly I realized I'm about this life. You know, I liked the structure. I liked the rules. I liked merit-based things, you know, work hard, apply yourself, good things will happen. You know, I liked all of that. I thrived in it. I liked that the learning in the Air Force was very different from a school structure. It was very hands-on. We're going to teach you how to do this thing by going out and doing the thing, you know. So I thrived in it. I loved it, and it very quickly became my life's plan. You know, I thought I'll do this for 20 years, maybe more, retire, get a government job, do that for 20 years, retire at 60 with 2 pensions. You know, play it safe until Social Security at 66, 67, whatever it is. And then once I had 3 checks coming in the mail, no one was going to tell me anything. Unfortunately, 3 years into my Air Force career, the Air Force said I had adult onset asthma and kicked me out. And I fought it. I tried to convince them to let me stay in, but this was in 05, 06. The Air Force was doing what they call force shaping, where, you know, somebody who makes more money than me decided the Air Force had too many people and they needed to thin the herd. And, you know, unfortunately, I was one of those people. You know, they started off with, you know, letting people just get out. They let people transfer to Guard or Reserve. You know, they kicked out the bad apples. But in the end, they started picking on medical stuff. And unfortunately, that was me. Like my transition from Air Force life to civilian life was not easy. You know, I didn't have a backup plan. You know, in my life, especially up until that point, I kind of put all my eggs in one basket. You know what I mean? Again, I was, from a young age, I was always trying to figure out who or what I was. Anytime I kind of figured out, well, maybe it's this, I just kind of dove headfirst into that thing, you know what I mean? And then when it didn't work out, I'd move on to the next thing. So when the Air Force thing stuck, you know, I thought, well, this is it, you know? I'm good at this. I'm a good airman. So I don't know, I never imagined a world where I wouldn't be in. And then when the medical stuff happened, I just flat out did not have a backup plan. By that time, I had gotten out, I had gotten an apartment, I had gotten a job, and then the second blow came, lose your career, lose your girl. It was pretty dark, I'll admit. One of the darker times of my life, for sure. And so there I was in this small town right outside of base. Great town. New Mexico is wonderful, great town, but not a very big one. Not a lot of opportunity, not a lot of things going on there. And so I just kind of sat in my own misery for a while. In the end, I got to a place once again in my life where I was just like, okay, it can't be this. It's got to be better than this. What am I going to do? So I decided to chase music. Music was my first love in this life. It really was. And I had always dreamed of being a successful musician. When I was a kid, I played air guitar and sang in the shower and did all that kind of stuff. So, you know, this is the MySpace days. So I got it in my head I was going to find me a band. So I got on MySpace and I said, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. This is the kind of music I want to play. You know, does anybody know a band out there that has all the pieces? They're just looking for a singer. You know, I can sing pretty good, I can scream, let me know. That led to a message from a relative back home in Florida. Florida is where I'm from originally. Took some time off work, flew down there, auditioned, got the gig, and then I put all my eggs in that basket. Chased music for 2 years. It was a lot of fun. Hard, but a lot of fun. And the guys I played music with were really talented. They were young, but they were really talented. And, you know, once again in my life, I thought, all right, this is it. I found it, you know. No one's gonna outwork me. No one's gonna try harder. I got a good group of guys with me. This is it, we're gonna make it. 2 years in, our drummer, God bless him, miss you, Tim. Our drummer, you know, I think he maybe thought things were going to progress a little faster than they were, and so he decided to join the Navy. Once again, I'm trying to figure out, where's my life going? What am I doing? When the band ended, I had a job already, and I was working in a tattoo shop. You know, I had to keep several jobs to pay the bills and feed myself while I was chasing music. And one of those jobs was working front counter at a tattoo shop in Panama City Beach, Florida. Well, it's a good thing you got me, bro. And originally, I'll be honest, guys, I got that job because it was a cool atmosphere, it was a cool environment, you know, it was a little bit of extra money, you know, I get some cool tattoos, you know, I'm an aspiring musician, you know, those two worlds, they're kind of adjacent to one another in a lot of ways. But when the band ended, once again, here I am, I'm in my mid-20s and I'm doing soul searching. I'm trying to figure this thing out. When you spend time in a tattoo shop, it's a very infectious atmosphere, you know, it gets a hold of you, you know, it's fun and it's dramatic at times and it's loud and it's stimulating and there's so many things about it. And the more time I spent in that tattoo shop, the more I felt kind of at home. You know, bottom line was I just found myself in an environment where I felt comfortable. One day I told myself, and I didn't tell anybody else at the shop that I work with. I kept it to myself and I just said, I'm gonna work here until they fire me or give me an apprenticeship. I must have done something right, because eventually a guy named Ken Reed sat me down and offered me an apprenticeship. He became my mentor. That started the chapter of what became all of this. There I am. What happens next? Well, from the time I started to the time I became a tattooer was about 2 years. My mentor Ken was a real old school guy, and my apprenticeship was not easy. It wasn't. I'm very grateful for it, and it's a big point of pride with me to this day and forever of how hard it was. You know, I often joke, if you've been in the shop a lot around me, at this shop or previous shops, you've probably heard me say, I'd rather go to basic training 10 times than do a tattoo apprenticeship again. And it's pretty much the truth, you know? With the tattoo apprenticeship, especially back then, you know what I mean? There was not a lot of absolutes, you know? There was a lot of walking in the shop that day and, you know, what's gonna happen? So it was long and it was really hard. I got some great stories. I got a lot of really cool memories. It was an awesome time. I started my career in Florida. Same place where I was in the band, Panama City Beach, Florida, at a shop called Mango Beach Tattoo, right on Front Beach Road in Panama City Beach. After 2 years of working there and apprenticing and stuff, I became a tattooer. And so just to give a little history, Florida is very seasonal, right? You know, you've got your big cities that have lots of people and lots of things and a high year-round population, and then a lot of the other cities in Florida, coastal cities, you know, they're very touristy and they have smaller, you know, year-round populations. So, you know, a lot of those towns, they live and die by tourism. You know, when I finished my apprenticeship, it was kind of on the downside of the year, you know what I mean? And my mentor wanted to kind of put me on a schedule right away, but the owner of the shop was kind of like, no, you know, money's slim, don't put the new guy on. You know, you guys eat what money there is, you know what I mean? And then when spring break hits, which is always back then, and even still today, spring break was the first big kickoff to the season, you know? So, hey, you could do tattoos, but you had to bring in your own customers, no walk-ins, stuff like that. So I did that January, February, and then March hit, and it was like, you're on the schedule, go. And back then in Panama City Beach, whew, spring break was still wild. Not so much anymore, but back then, man, it was a zoo. It was a whirlwind. You know, there was a lot of days at the end of those days where I got through it, but I was like, whew, what did I get myself into? It was hard, and it always is. Tattooing never gets easy, but I had all the tools to get through it and survive. And I wound up spending 6 years total at that shop. 2 working and apprenticing, and then 4 full-time tattooing. Around the 4-year mark, my mentor Ken moved away. He has 2 kids, and those kids started having kids, And you know, the idea of being far away from his grandbabies was just killing him. And so he decided he was gonna move closer to his daughter, who had had their first grandbaby, and be closer to them. And so for the first time in my career, I didn't have my mentor right by my side. And an opportunity just presented itself right around that time. I remember I had gotten a call from Ken, and he had still a few things in Florida in like a storage shed, and he needed me to bring it to him. And so I had rented a U-Haul trailer and all that kind of stuff. And I was driving to Georgia to bring the stuff to Ken. My phone rang. I got a phone call from Alan Heiss, but nobody knows him by that name. Everybody back then and his whole life called him Albie. Albie owned Black Cat Tattoo, which was the cream of the crop in Panama City Beach, right? You know what I mean? It was like, I would equate it to like a minor league baseball player getting called up to the majors. You know, when my phone rang and it was Albie, you know, I was driving, I almost ran my truck off the road. I thought, why in the world is he calling me? And I picked up the phone and he was like, hey Brandon, this is Albie. And I said, I know who the hell this is. What's up, man? What's going on? He offered me a job. And I just thought, man, what are the odds? I spent the whole rest of the drive just going, wow, you know, kind of looking up, just going, what's going on? What is this? What am I supposed to do? I got to Georgia, and in true Ken fashion, he knew, he could see it right on me right away, like something was up. And so we started talking, and you know, he asked me, he's like, well, you told him yes, right? And I'm like, of course I told him yes, Ken. Hell yeah, I told him yes. And so, you know, I wound up moving down there, like right at the end of the year. You know, like I think I finished out kind of Christmas, and then right after Christmas, I went to Black Cat. And then it was like, when the day came to start at Black Cat, that first day, man, I was heavy. I was like, oh crap. Like, you know, in 4 years of tattooing, I was working at the best shop in town, and I was like, you know, I got nowhere to go but up. And so once again, a quiet sponge. Well, maybe not quiet, I'm a pretty chatty guy, but I wound up working there. It was just a little over a year, and I'll never forget it. It was off season, it was January, not much going on that time of year in Florida. And I remember I was sitting on the couch with my best friend Justin, and the phone rang, and it was a lady, and she was hysterical. I could hear, you know, Justin had the phone, and he was kind of like, you know, like, oh my God, she was wailing, she was crying. And long story short, Albie died. And it was, man, you know, for a while there, it was like the Wild West. You know, we were just, you know, what do we do? It was crazy. As you can imagine, after that, the shop kind of broke up. My wife was pregnant at the time with our first child, and I remember thinking, Jesus, man, like what? Fortunately, Albie never owned that building. He owned the business, he didn't own the building. And long story short, we were able to get the shop reopened because the guy that owned the building always kind of owned it, so technically it wasn't changing hands, and we kind of found a loophole in the zoning laws, whatever. We got the shop back open. And I'm proud to say I played a pretty big role in getting that back open. You know, the owner of the building wasn't a tattooer, he didn't know anything about the tattoo business. You know, obviously I was struggling. And so when I heard that there was a possibility, you know, I was real quick to get in there, introduce myself and say, hey, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need help with? What do you not know? What do you need to know? And again, I'm proud to say that I played a big role in getting that shop reopened. And then when we got it reopened, I got everybody back. It was called American Classic Tattoo. And I thought, okay, you know, like, whew, we're gonna be good. Now, how did I wind up in Omaha? Remember I said that my wife was pregnant during that very tumultuous time? At the time my wife and I were first married, we both worked. My wife was a very talented pastry chef. She had a great job, she made great money, and when we started our family, you know, my wife really felt like her place was at home. She didn't want to be gone as much. As a family, we made the decision for her to leave her job and to stay home with our daughter. And you know, that was a great thing for our family, that was a great thing for our daughter, that was a great thing for a lot of reasons. But, you know, it put us in a real financial pinch. My money in Florida, even though I was at the best shop in town, it's very seasonal in Florida. You know, for a couple years there, they were really tight. And after 2 years of really struggling but getting through, you know, my wife and I started talking about growing our family. and having another baby and what that would look like and what that would cost and what it would take to make that happen. In the end, we decided that the best way to grow our family was to relocate to a place that wasn't quite so seasonal, to a place that was, you know, a little bit more self-sustaining, that wasn't so heavily reliant on tourism to live and die by. You know, we kind of operated under the plan of like, you know, I'll keep my ear to the ground. When the right opportunity shows up, you know, I'll be ready for it. In ways that just tend to happen in my life, you know, things just happen. And I think it was maybe just a couple weeks after my wife and I had kind of finalized that this is what we were gonna do. I'm at the shop one day and this guy comes in. Never met him before in my life, never seen him before. He comes in, he was real polite, and he introduces himself as a tattooer, and he says he's from Omaha, Nebraska. You know, relatively regularly frequents the area. To be like, you know, hey, I'm down here relatively often. I like the shop, I like what you guys got going on. You know, is there any chance you would allow me to come do a guest spot? I know when the money's good here, it's pretty good, and when the money's bad, it's not so good. So, you know, I don't know how it works with guest artists during the season, but you know, if there's any chance at all that you would consider letting me come here, you know, I'd really appreciate it. And you know, I can return the favor. You know, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and I work at a great shop that is busy year round. Now, at that point, when he said that, I really didn't hear much else he said. I mean, I did, but I didn't. I just heard busy year round. I don't know, there was just something about that interaction that I thought, all right, I need to follow up on this. And so, you know, we did exchange information, and I kept in touch with him, text messages and things like that, you know what I mean? And I think initially he, after having lived here in Omaha for 8 years, sometimes when you explain how things are here, people who are not familiar with the area, who is not a lot of people know a lot about Omaha or even where it is on a map. I've come to find in my time here that when you talk about Omaha, people kind of like, what, where? So when I was so enthusiastic about coming here, I think initially he thought, yeah, we'll see. But I didn't let up. I kept, hey, when am I coming? When can I come? What's going on? Do you need somebody? And eventually I think he figured out that I wasn't completely full of shit and I was ready to come. And so he called me up and he said, hey man, what do you think about coming up here and working Halloween weekend and then the week after? So 10 days. I said, I'm good, let's go. You know, that's October, so we're well into the dead season in Florida. Called my dad, borrowed his truck, and drove 1,400 miles to Omaha on this guy's word that I would do all right. And boy, let me tell you, I did pretty good. Eventually, that all turned into, that wound up leading to a permanent offer. You know, I talked to my wife about it, and we moved up here. Well, I moved up here in March. I remember Florida was pretty tight money-wise, so we didn't really have the money to move. So I wound up moving up here for about a month by myself to make enough money to go back and get my family to move. But I used that month wisely, made money, saved money, got a place for us to stay, all that good stuff, and then we moved up here. Now, how did I wind up at the Brig?
Hey Ty, what's up? How you doing?
I should have called. I usually text him about coffee.
Yeah, what the fuck?
He brought coffee for everybody.
I spent 8 years at that shop here in Omaha. Changed my whole life. It really did. I'll never forget it. But, you know, in life, as you've figured out from this video, things change. Eventually, it was time for me to go. I didn't know what was next, but I knew it was time for something different. I thought, you know, I've been tattooing for 15 years. So, you know, not a short time, but not a long time. You know, kind of in the middle, if you ask me, you know. And I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to leave, you know, it's probably time for me to do my own thing. And I looked into it. Just the right spot, it just wasn't there. A good friend of mine named Josephine, she had her phone out. And she had Instagram pulled up. And she goes, do you know this person? And I kind of, you know, I was standing up front in my booth and I kind of looked and I went, no, I don't recognize him, why? And she looks at me and she goes, he seems like your kind of guy. Then I laughed and I said, what the hell does that mean? She goes, well, you know, he's a tratty daddy like you. He's a former Marine, you know, and used to be in the Air Force. You got the military background thing, and you know, this guy puts out a lot of content, so you really get to kind of know him like really well. And you know, I've kind of watched a lot of it, and I don't know, I just think he seems like your kind of guy. And I saw that you weren't following him, you know, so I was just like kind of curious, like, have you ever heard of him? And I was like, no, I never heard of him. She's like, I really think you would like his stuff. You should check him out. And so I was like, let me see him one more time. I kind of looked, and I just kind of made a mental note. Yeah, I'll check his stuff out later. And so later that evening, I did. I looked up Geoff, and she was right. He's a pretty cool cat. And I watched a lot of his stuff. I thought, this guy is pretty interesting. I want to go see what this guy's about. Because, like, you know, you could see his shop, you know. Geoff had a real small private studio, as I'm sure you guys know. You know, he had a small private studio at the time, and it just looked like it had so much charm and character to it, you know, and like, I just want to see it, you know, I want to see what this guy was about. And I kind of figured out where he was, which is in the most obscure place of Omaha, by the way. You know, obviously I didn't have Geoff's number or anything, so I did the best thing I could. I sent him a DM, and I said, hey man, this is me, this is who I am. I'd love to come check out your shop sometime if you'll have me, you know, let me know, you know. And Geoff will tell you, uncharacteristically, he responded to my DM. I slid into his DMs, and he hit me back and he said, yeah man, I'd love to have you, stop by anytime, this is when I'm here. And it took me a couple weeks, you know, I didn't like get there right away, you know, it took me a little while to carve out the time to get up there, but eventually I got up there. You know, Geoff's old studio, some of you who are watching this, you've been there. Some of you who are watching this haven't been there. It's really small. The whole thing was like 300 square feet. So pretty much the second you opened the door, you were in Geoff's station. And he wasn't tattooing when I first walked in there. He was standing right there. So as soon as I walked in, he was standing right there. And he said, you must be Brandon. And I said, you must be Geoff. But I'm older, all right? And I really appreciate just a good, firm handshake, right? You know what I mean? Geoff, right off the bat, you know, one of those good ones where it just clicked. It's not all like, eh, you know, it was like a solid ass handshake. And I was like, God damn, you know? And he said, man, what brings you to me? And I said, Geoff, you seem like a guy who's got a hell of a story and I want to hear it. And he said, take a seat. So I had a seat. And man, let me tell you what, that first day was fucking cool. I think I hung out for like the whole day. It was like 6-7 hours. You know, some people in life, you know, they have lots of friends, you know, or acquaintances. You know, people have different definitions of friendship, but you know, in my life, moving all the time and being the new kid in school all the time and constantly starting over, you know, like I don't have any lifelong friends, you know. As quickly as it happened with Geoff and I, like, I mean, that's just a special thing. You know, we just kind of clicked right away. We were,
My turn red.
a little bit.
Yeah, tomato red.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for that. He's saying sweet things about you, and you're over here ruining it.
We see tattooing especially, and life in general, through a very similar lens. You know, it's rare for all the reasons I just said, but it's also rare because Geoff and I are very far apart in age. You know, I'm 13 years older than Geoff. I've been tattooing quite a bit longer than Geoff. That can be difficult at times, you know, for a lot of reasons. You know, how do you relate to one another? You come from different eras, different times, you know. But Geoff and I, it doesn't fucking matter. I was in that shop every chance I got, you know, and it wasn't every week, but it was as often as I could. And, you know, it was never a quick visit. I always hung out for a while, you know, and through that, I got to meet some of Geoff's great clients, and I got to know a lot about Geoff's story and where he's from and where he comes from. And Geoff got to hear a lot of this and where I come from, and I got to meet Geoff's great wife, Alexa, and see their marriage and their bond and all that kind of stuff, which is also a really special thing. You know, I'm very fortunate in my life to have a great woman in my life. My wife, Brittany, is my favorite person in the whole world, you know, and I look at marriage very old-fashioned, you know what I mean? It's a big deal to me how it's treated and all those types of things, you know, and you know, that was one more thing to the list of great things about Geoff and Alexa, was they had a bond that was very similar to my wife and I, you know. So I just knew, for a lot of reasons, that I had found, you know, at the minimum, a new great set of friends, you know. And so eventually one day, Geoff hit me up and he said, the cops are coming. Eventually, Geoff hit me up one day and he goes, hey man, I love you coming by. I love our talks. It's the best. Please don't ever stop. But hey, do you think we could get together one day when I'm not working? I said, yeah, man, of course. And so we arranged a day off one day, you know, BYOC, bring your own coffee. And we hung out for hours and talked, and we talked really about tattoo stuff a lot. And we got a couple of those, and they were great. We kind of knew, like, this is probably gonna be the last time we hung out for the year, you know, see you next year sort of thing, you know. And we walked out on the front porch of Geoff's shop, and he said, hey man, I know you gotta go. I know you gotta go, but can I ask just one more question? And I said, of course, man, what's up? And he looked at me very sincerely and he said, am I doing all right? Am I doing okay? And I said, Geoff, yeah, man. I mean, in so many ways you give me hope, you know. Not all, but a lot of this younger generation of tattooers, they're just cut from a different cloth. But Geoff really gives me hope for this next generation of tattooers. And I did my best in that moment to convey that to him and build him up and make him feel good. And I said, the one thing that I see on the horizon that might be a problem, that will be a problem, is right now you're in an echo chamber. Life is awesome, things are awesome, tattoos are awesome, everything's going great, right? Tattooing is something that if you want to get better, if you want to meet or exceed your potential, you have to surround yourself with your peers. Tattooing in so many ways is very communal, and you need your peers around you. You need people to check you. You need people to bust you up and bust your chops, you know. You need to surround yourself with people who are better than you if you're gonna get better. And I told that to Geoff, and I just said, look, your work ethic and your drive and what you're doing and how you're doing it, you're going to progress a lot faster than most of your peers. Now, I don't think you're gonna have this problem anytime soon. I think you got a few years, but in a few years, I think you're gonna have a tough decision to make, Geoff. And I think it's really only gonna go just a couple of ways. And you know, he kind of was like, what? It was kind of like Chunk from the Goonies, you know? Oh shit, what? And I just said, look, you're either gonna A, have to try to figure out a way to fit somebody else in this little space you got here, which may or may not work, or you're gonna have to get a bigger spot. You know, you're gonna have to try to get some people to come work with you, you know, which is gonna be hard because at your age and your experience level, like, you know, who are you gonna get? Are they gonna be willing to work for a younger guy? All that kind of stuff. I kind of went into all that, and I said, or you're gonna have to, you know, eat a big slice of humble pie, take a pay cut, and, you know, go work for somebody else. And I said, you know, that'll be a tough decision that you're gonna have to make. Again, I reemphasize, this is on the horizon, Geoff. This isn't right now. But I said, you know, really, if I had to say anything at all, that would be it. And I said, you know, keep doing what you're doing, keep your head down. I'm here if you need me for whatever, you know. And when that time comes years from now, you know, we can talk about it. Like, what's the best plan? Now, pretty much the second I left, his hamster wheel starts turning. And Geoff likes to say that I planted a seed in his head. I was just trying to answer the question. I wasn't trying to plant no seeds, but Geoff is a Marine. He don't sit around and do nothing, not now, not ever, right? His mind started turning. He started thinking, there's a problem on the horizon. I'm not gonna wait for it. I'm gonna nip it in the bud right now. Now, I think Geoff has talked about this part of the story before, so I won't get too detailed into it, but, you know, some very fortuitous things happened where he found this great place that we're in now. And while this is all going on, I'm honestly looking into doing my own thing. I had a really good friend named Dave Koenig, who lives here locally in Omaha, who has a great shop. And you know, he gave me an opportunity to kind of give me a place to work and make money while I figured things out, because I really didn't know. You know, I just didn't know, like, what's next plan. I was kind of spinning my wheels looking for my own place and what I was going to do and how I was going to do it and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? I wasn't gaining much traction, and you know, I felt this urge to, you know, kind of get things going. And, you know, Dave's been a really, really good friend to me, and he, you know, he just he just kind of said, look, man, I don't necessarily have room for another permanent guy, but you know, I've always got room for a friend. So, you know, you come work with me, you know, for as long as you need to until you find where you need to be, right? Best wishes, anything you need, you know, that was really, really special to me. Thank you, Dave, for that. I'll never forget it. I really won't. So I wound up spending about a month, you know, at Dave's shop when it was all said and done. But, you know, again, while all this is happening, Geoff's cooking up what is to be this. And, you know, one day after the new year and all this other kind of stuff, you know, I came to hang out with Geoff. I missed my friend. You know, it'd been holidays. I hadn't seen him in a while. He starts telling me about this place. I kind of dadded him up a little bit, you know what I mean? Kind of big brother dad a little bit, like, Geoff, what are you doing? I told you, this is like in a few years, bro. Like, this is so great what you have here. Don't mess this up. What are you, like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? And he was just like, you know, you planted a seed in my head, Brandon. I can't sit on, you know, you guys know the story. He just said, hey, you want to come work with me? And to be honest, I didn't say yes right away. You know, I had to really think about it. I really did. You know, I had to talk to my wife, really fully explore the idea of doing my own thing for a minute. You know, I confided in some good friends, talked to my best friend Justin a lot about it, talked to Dave about it a lot, good buddy Jacob. I mean, I had a lot of conversations, a lot of time alone thinking about it. And in the end, all things pointed to Geoff. It just seemed like that's what I was supposed to do. Like it happened so many other times in my life, there was like this, you know, here I am in this situation, what am I gonna do? And then things just kind of, you know. So I made up my mind, I made my decision. If you've gotten tattooed by Geoff, you might have heard this story. I don't know that I've ever told it. I love it because I made him sweat. When I came to the shop one day and Geoff had a full day, no surprise there. I came in and he's like, hey man, what's up, what's going on? I said, well, I need to talk to you about something. And he's like, what's up? And I go, I'll tell you when you don't have a customer. Geoff had a fully booked day. So he sat all day. He sat all day. He tattooed that guy, and he actually wound up finishing his first appointment like a little bit early, and he thought like he had like a pretty good window, and he was just like, what is it? And then his next client showed up like 45 minutes early, and I was like, yeah, don't worry about it, man. Do your tattoos, do your work, focus on your work, I'll tell you later. And Geoff was just like, ah. But he got through that last tattoo, and we closed up the shop, and I just said, hey man, I'm in. And he was pretty happy. It was a good moment. As you know, Alexa didn't know what was going on. She called Geoff to talk about dinner or something, I think.
I want to know where he was.
Yeah. He's like, where are you at? What are you doing? And he put me on speakerphone. He's like, Brandon's in. You know, it took a minute to kind of turn this place into a functioning shop. You know, there's carpet. You can't have carpet in a tattoo shop. But yeah, that was pretty much it. After that, you know, I came up here as often as I could, try to help out when I could, you know, while I was working at Dave's. Geoff and Alexa did most of the work. February 27th of this year, the Brig opened. I'm proud to say I was here on day one, you know. I think that this tattoo shop is special. It will continue to get more special. I know one day, many years from now, I'm gonna look back on this and be like, I was at the ground level. I was one of the first. It's pretty cool. I think there's gonna be a lot of good things that come out of this place. I think there's gonna be some good people that come out of this place. And I think it's gonna be pretty cool to say I was a part of that. All right, so now that you guys have heard my story, you might be wondering, how's it going? It's been about 6-7 months. And guys, it's going great. It really has. For the first time in my career, I'm really getting to focus on my favorite stuff. You know, I've been at this a while, and I can do not everything, but I can do a decent amount of stuff. But American Traditional has always been what I wanted to focus on. It's always been my favorite. It's what I was drawn to before I was ever even a tattooer. It was what my favorite musicians had. The Geoff effect is real, okay? If you've ever been tattooed in here, you might have heard me talk about the Geoff effect, but that's a pretty clever guy, and he knows how to do the social media thing. And Geoff has really helped me step up my game in a real way and kind of modernize myself in that way. And for the first time in my career, I'm really primarily getting to do a lot of what I like to do. And I have Geoff to thank for that, and Alexa to thank for that, and I have this great community. You know, I want to say thank you to you guys. You guys have really embraced the Brig. This is a pretty big town, and it's full of a lot of great shops and a lot of really talented people. And the way that Little Bohemia and Omaha in general have really embraced the Brig, it's really, really special, and I really, really appreciate it. If you guys are watching this and you've been thinking about visiting us and you haven't yet, come check it out. You know, even if you don't get tattooed, just come check it out. You know, this place was a blank canvas, and Geoff and I are doing our best to fill it up and add new stuff all the time. You know, there's evidence of that. We've already got invited to do a great art show. Our friends over at Evil Eye put on a yearly art show and they invited us to be a part of it this year. That was really, really great, really special to be a part of. Probably one of my favorite moments from that art show, and there was a lot of great ones. Geoff and I and Alexa and my wife Brittany, we were kind of walking up as a team to the art show, and somebody shouted, "Oh shit, the Brig Boys are here." Now, I had heard that term before, you know, when I first got this going. My best friend Justin was kind of planting some seeds in my head about a couple of ideas to things to do, and he was the first person to say that term, you know, the Brig Boys or whatever. But, you know, walking up to a public space full of people, you know what I mean, when they shouted that, everybody kind of turned and looked. I'm not too proud to say it felt really cool. It felt really cool, you know, and I've heard it several times since then, and every time I hear it, it just reminds me of what a special thing this is and what it's going to be and all those things. So again, I just want to say thank you to all you guys. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, to get to know me. You know, so much of the Brig is associated with Geoff and his story and all his stuff, and you know, this is my opportunity for y'all to get to know me a little bit and what I'm about. So thank you again for taking the time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you guys will come visit us at the Brig soon. Thank you so much.